Hello, everyone. It's Kate Stillman with yogahealer.com, Yoga Healer Podcast, and I have the pleasure of having Dr. Grant Antoine and Hilary Kaiser with us today. And these guys come from Biome, which the way I came into contact with Biome, I think I was actually Googling to see, as I was writing the Wild Habits book and, up to my throat in microbiome research. And I was like, well, what are the best test kit companies? So I was Googling around, reading a lot of reviews on test kit companies, came across Biome. And because I lead a global community, I have to be fairly careful with vetting products to recommend. And anyone who's an influencer knows exactly what I mean, because if you align with the wrong products that don't work, you are doing everybody, including yourself, a disservice. And so I took some time and really checked out Biome and was super impressed. Went ahead and bought the Biome test kit. It was mailed to my house. You do a little blood test. You put your poop in a vial. You send it back, and they tell you what's going on with you. And then they design precision supplements. And these are the people behind the company in terms of the science and the nutrition. So I would just love to hear from you too in terms of your interest in helping people with microbiome and supplementation that's really specific to what's going on in terms of how they're able to digest the supplements that they're taking and what kind of benefits that they can expect from real precision supplementation and even from knowing what's going on in their microbiome. And maybe we should start with a definition of all of a sudden it's occurring to me of not everybody's up to their throat in microbiome research. So who wants to start with a definition?
What, the microbiome itself?
Yeah, let's start with that.
Yeah, sure. So inside of us all is this organ that most of us aren't aware of that has a tremendous impact on our health as humans. This organ is unique to each one of us. It starts to develop when we're born, and it is actually made up of foreign cells, right? Bacteria. So this microbiome of bacterial cells impacts how we metabolize foods. It impacts our immune system and our immune reactions, really informs our immune system at an early age, right? When you start to think about environmental exposures and the body being able to recognize, self versus non-self, and then non-self, friend versus foe. And then from a metabolic perspective, these little critters, they develop or produce these metabolites, amino acids, short chain fatty acids, I guess the end byproducts of metabolism of plant constituents that have a tremendous benefit to us, to our cells, and to our health.
I mean, this is the thing. The more we understand microbiome, the more we get that the inner and outer ecosystem are in constant relationship with each other, right? And if they're not in constant relationship in a good way, then it's in a bad way. It's not this is an organ that absolutely depends on our choices. Even from what I can tell in some microbiome research I was looking into, it's actually the microbiome that enables our physiology to attune to circadian rhythm. It's not our own DNA cells that are time to go to bed, time to wake up. It's actually the microbiome. So if the microbiome in our bodies is sick or dysbiotic, we are not running right.
No, absolutely. There's so many connections between the gut, the microbiome, and all health systems, right? So you take a nervous system, cardiovascular system, endocrine system, like you're alluding to. Their impacts, they've done studies to show how these microbes impact our socialization with other humans. It's a tremendous impact. We haven't been able to understand this impact. I think from a traditional perspective, we've always known, you mentioned Ayurvedic medicine and traditional Chinese medicine, naturopathic medicine. These traditions are generally, gut forward. We think of the gut first. You start with the gut whenever there is some kind of imbalance or disease, disease. You start with the gut, you look for imbalances there because it was recognized that the gut had such a large role. We didn't have the tools back then to understand, though, that these microbes are playing a huge role in that, and even today, up until now with Biome's technology and be able to look at the metatranscriptomic data, and not just, I think traditionally we've been able to do the genomics and say, hey, what critters are in there and kind of what are their relative ratios, but we didn't really know what they're doing. Now we can, through looking at mRNA, we can say, hey, now we know who's in there, what they're doing, what they're responding to, and then now we can start to elucidate, like, hey, where are the patterns? Where is the lack of communication? What are things that a loss of function or dysfunction that we can correct, and improve both the communication and the benefit that we get from these bacteria in our bodies.
I mean, to me, it's so fascinating because then, like the supplements that you design are feeding the microbiome and feeding, even feeding new, basically bacteria back into the physiology. And when I look at Ayurveda, it's like half of the medicines. When I was studying, like they have a word called anupana, which is how the medicine is delivered in the physiology. So like depending on the nature of the person, nature of the imbalance, the nature of how you would deliver the medicine, like over half of them were using ferments, right?
Yeah.
And we've lost that. And so like people don't understand the nature of how medicine used to be even delivered, right? And using the microbiome as a delivery mechanism and as a medicine in itself. So it's, to me, when I saw like, oh, you guys are doing that, yay, biome.
Yay, biome.
Yeah. It really puts things into perspective. You have more microbiome cells, more microbial cells in your body than you do actual human cells. So it has such a tremendous impact on your health.
Well, and I mean, another thing that we need to be aware of, right, is from what I know from the rewilding research I was doing, is that like humans today have 30% less microbiome than humans did 100 years ago, or than the people that we're finding that are still in indigenous type of cultural settings that are not impacted by, modern factory farm foods and modern habits. So like we're like the microbiome, if we look at it as an organ, right? And that's exactly what you started off with. The microbiome is an organ. So let's think of the other organs in the body, right? Like if your lungs are operating at 30% less capacity, no bueno.
No bueno. Yeah, absolutely. And, we don't really understand. I mean, I think through modern medicine, we see, hey, we're seeing increases in autoimmunity, asthma, allergic associated conditions, eczema, psoriasis. Where is this coming from? We know, our environment definitely plays a role, but what impacts outside of like our human cells, then it's the environment and the impact on that microbiome. And that's why we see such large differences in the diversity and the richness of those species that are in our gut, compared to indigenous cultures. Where's the balance? Can we, as Western societies, find some kind of balance to mitigate the impacts that modern life has on us and our cells and our microbiome, and improve that diversity without, going 100% back to our roots and going tribal? I don't know. It's a great question, right?
Yeah. Well, and maybe it's not like this if then, right? It's like let's use all the tools. So Hillary, I know you're also an at-home fermentation enthusiast. I just put our kimchi. It made it from the counter into the refrigerator today. I also am an at-home fermentation enthusiast, and you're a biochemist turned biohacker, and you're the one that, as a clinical nutritionist at Biome, is making these precision nutrition programs for people. So I'm curious how you're finding that balance, because when I got my Biome results, I was not impressed with myself. I was like, I've got some work to do. So, and here I am, an at-home fermentation enthusiast. So I'm curious for you, part of your journey with yourself as personal biohacker and as a clinical nutritionist and as a biochemist, how you're balancing what Grant and I were just talking about.
Yeah, that's funny. We just did our gut shots before this podcast. I made some golden kvass. But yeah.
Oh my gosh! Wait, just on that, we have so much to talk about. If we can just do an episode on gut shots, we will.
Gut shots and yoga, and one time we'll have to talk about yoga too. I'm a yogi. Well, and to answer your question, I thought I was living a really healthy lifestyle before Biome. And I was also really surprised by my results of my first test. I thought, wow, my gut is that bad. I eat mostly vegetarian. I'm eating a lot of vegetables. How could this be? But then with Biome, you get actionable steps that you can actually take. And one of the foundations of the nutrition program is diversity. And so I was, eating my same salad every day. And so that really opened up my eyes to other foods that could help. And then also the supplements, taking the pre and probiotics and the daily capsules. Since I started taking that, my scores have tremendously improved. I went from suboptimal and average to now almost all are great. So.
Oh, that's exciting. I'm going to get my supplements next week, so I'm excited.
Supplements are great and they're very convenient. They come in a stick pack. It has your pre and probiotics in it. So your custom probiotic concoction is in there with your fibers. And then you have 8 capsules a day. They can have your vitamins, minerals, herbs, enzymes, whatever it is that you need that we determine from our AI. So it's convenient and it's exactly what you need, custom made for you. No one else.
So let's talk about that customization and how important that is versus one size fit all. I mean, when I look at allopathic medicine, I've just been reading so much scientific literature and writing the Wild Habits book. Just study after study after study after study, and medicine more or less has a one size fits all approach, right? Like, these people are obese, so we tried this drug. And this is the opposite. So for people that don't really know much about personalized medicine and why that might matter with microbiome health, and again, the microbiome is feeding the human DNA cells so that they don't mutate, so that they don't, so that the mitochondria within those cells doesn't fold and become irregular. I mean, there's so much going on, right? So how much does personalization matter? And what are you guys seeing in analyzing when you get a lot of information from people? So my guess is there's trends as well where, it's like, where are we all screwed together and where are we all screwed in our own unique way?
Yeah, so that uniqueness, like our bio identities, right? It starts with our genetics, but it turns out we share so much genetics, it's not really informative. Plus our genes don't really change over time, right? If you look at someone's genes, you can't tell they're alive, they're dead, they're sick, they're well. It's just kind of a blueprint of all possibilities. That's why Biome, we look at RNA, right? And especially messenger RNA, because now with the messenger RNA, that's being transcribed from the genes that are actually being expressed. And then the proteins that are kind of responding or are being created to handle some metabolic task are being generated from that messenger RNA. So we look at that mRNA, we collect it, we analyze it, and we say, hey, okay, now we can look back and see which exact genes are being expressed. We know what proteins they're leading to, so we know the purpose of that expression, and not only that, when we collect enough of that RNA and enough of those genes, we can actually identify, looking at the microbiome, we can identify the microorganisms that it's coming from. So it's a win-win situation. So now we know exactly what microbes are there, what they're doing, what they're responding to. Again, just looking at that activity. So that's the microbiome. We can also look at how our own cells are reacting. We can look at cellular functions, mitochondrial functions, immune activation, really to know, hey, how are we as an individual responding to our stressors and to our environment? Because we all have different environments, we all have different stressors, and we all react in a slightly different way. So we all are very unique. Trying to understand that, capture it, and know how we can leverage that in an intervention, through a dietary intervention, a supplement, even a medicine, right? As you go into precision medicine, we're realizing is so much more important than kind of doing that, treating the herd type mentality that you're referring to. So that's kind of where we come in. We look at your biology. We've developed these health scores to simplify, this it's like looking at the sun, right? There's so much information. Where do you begin? So we've developed these scores to look at this gene expression, to put it into buckets for folks. So we look at gut microbiome, cellular health, immune health, mitochondrial, I mentioned, stress response. We look at your biological age. So we look on both sides of the gut, both at the microbiome and your own unique biology. And we say, hey, where are the opportunities? Where's the loss of function? And how can we correct that through nutrition? That's where our dietary recommendations come in. We'll bucket foods into superfood classes or minimize and avoid classes that you can move forward and fit in kind of any other diet, whether you're vegetarian or omnivore, whatever other diet plan you're working with, that can help guide you to personalize that diet. And then because we understand, we can only get so much food into our mouths in a single day, the power of supplementation and being targeted, right? That's where the supplements really come in. We can increase our potency and our be more specific with our targeting in these pathways that we're trying to measure. So we can bring in the CoQ10s and the resveratrols and the vitamin D and the herbs to really be as effective as possible and move the needle on your health.
Yeah. So are you seeing in like the metadata of all the data, is there trends in terms of like everyone's missing this?
No, there's no absolutes, right? There's no absolutes.
Are there big categories?
We have such a large customer base that there's really, it's such a spectrum.
It's really diverse. So that's good information in itself.
Customers. So we have the largest database of RNA data in the world. But trends, I mean, there's so many different types of people.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because I mean, one of the things when I like right when I got my Biome kit, my dad got he got a stomach cancer diagnosis, and this isn't new. Like, he's in his 80s. My dad's had cancer on and off since his 40s. We both have Lynch syndrome, which is a genetic precursor to certain types of cancer that in yogic language are all first and second chakra cancers, like cancers below the belt. So I was like, Dad, take this. And I sent him a Biome kit, and I was like, do this and then talk about the results with your doctor. And it was so, I mean, he's in his 80s, but it was just so out there. And I was like, is your doctor talking, because the stomach colon, right? Like certain things, and from an Ayurvedic perspective, are easier to deliver medicine to. Certain organs or certain even microbiomes are easier to hit than others, right? We could even say it that way. Like skin's kind of easy. You can rub, you can rub things on your skin. That changes your skin microbiome immediately. You can sniff things up your nose. I mean, I think a lot of the microbiomes are really easy to hit, but like stomach's pretty easy. And it's this massive disconnect, right, between how people under Medicaid or Medicare or their insurance programs are being treated versus, I think, people that are more biohackers. And I love that you use that word, Hillary, because it's a word that I think I was living that. I think the yogis have been living that word for a very, very long time, which is this idea that like you're in the driver's seat. Words like svadhyaya and svastha are a huge part of the Ayurvedic pantheon and yogic pantheon of how do you be you in the best way possible? And they really mean like seated in yourself and self-wisdom and studying the self. And if we know what's going on in our microbiome, that's a massive insight into self-study. And I'm not seeing this technology, at least in my own family, being used in the modern medical system. So how big is the gap? How diagnostic are tools like Biome in terms of, I'm not in terms of anything. How diagnostic are the tools in terms of what medicine should be using?
Well, first off, we're not a diagnostic tool, right? We're a consumer-facing test.
Wellness.
Yeah, wellness test.
Okay, but even so now, okay, so if we take the parlance of the FDA out, right? I'm using it to self-diagnose, right? Like, how's my microbiome doing? It's the best tool to measure how my microbiome's doing.
Yeah, I would even say you're not trying to self-diagnose, but you're trying to identify ways you can foster and build health, right? So stepping away from this idea of a diagnosis, that's what traditional medicine's trying to do. They want to slap you with the diagnosis so then they can treat that diagnosis.
Okay.
We're coming from a very different approach where we don't care what you call it. We see dysfunction before we even can give it a name. We're looking upstream so far that, hey, it's not diabetes, it's not pre-diabetes. We're starting to see dysfunction so far upstream, but we can already identify that you're likely going to go down this path towards that diagnosis. But we don't ever want you to get there. We don't even want to call it, but we want to recognize that dysfunction, create restore that balance, right? And then put you back on that health trajectory.
So I guess what I'm saying, or what I'm trying to, the way that I see it as so useful is it's diagnosing the health of my microbiome. I'm not trying to diagnose a disease. I'm trying to say, like, how is this doing right now? And maybe the word diagnose isn't good. Maybe a word like measure is better, just because of the FDA languaging and stuff. Like that. Yeah. I was talking with this scientist the other day about, I'm trying to get studies on urine and aged urine done, because in my experience, it really nourishes the microbiome. And he's like, well, are you calling urine a drug or a food or, a medicine? Because like the way,
I got to know what bucket it falls in.
Right. Okay. So I get it. We have to stay away from the word diagnosing the microbiome. I wasn't trying to use it to diagnose disease, but okay, got it. So in terms of measuring the microbiome and where those measurements point to downstream, if someone keeps up the same diet and lifestyle, can we talk about utility that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, going back, you were asking the question about some buckets. This might be a good opportunity. When you talk about like butyrate production, might be an ideal. We see a lot of lack of butyrate production in our populations. It depends on the population, but and this idea, everyone, butyrate's kind of a buzzword or a keyword in the supplement industry. Everyone wants to try to get their butyrate, but is it just a lack of the fibers in your diet, right? That the microbes, maybe I should step back. The microbes help us produce the butyrate. We don't produce it on our own. The microbes will produce butyrate from fibers that we can't digest. By fermenting those fibers, they produce this butyrate, which is anti-inflammatory, and it acts as a fuel for the cells that line our gut. So it's very beneficial for us. And so the idea is, well, more butyrate is better. So people will start to bring in more fibers, which is great. But do you actually have the microbes in your gut that do that work, right? Because not all microbes can create the butyrate. There's a very specific genus and species. We can look and see, hey, actually, do you have the microbes that are in there that do the work? And then are they even doing the work? Are those pathways turned on because they're actually getting that stimulus from your diet? Or are they, underrepresented? Or they're not as functional as they could be? We can measure that. We can see that. And a lot of folks need some support. Now, whether it's with the diet itself or with the microbial support, it varies. But that's what makes our platform unique, because now we can say, oh, well, no, actually, you need some of these probiotic strains that we can deliver to you. Or maybe you need both that and the fibers. We can also give you some prebiotic fibers to help you. And then plus the dietary recommendations, where we're going to try to increase, that artichoke and the chicory and all these root vegetables that can really help increase both that butyrate activity and support those microbes so that they flourish, and you get an increased richness in those bugs.
Are you seeing like functional medicine doctors or holistic practitioners or allopathic doctors recommending Biome, and how are they using it?
Yeah, kind of all the above, especially for gastrointestinal complaints. When people are coming in with these functional issues with gas and bloating and GERD, Biome's great for that. Being able to use diet, food as medicine to decrease those symptoms, because we can look, hey, if you are suffering from gas and bloating, what kind of gas are you creating? Is it sulfide? Is it methane? Are the critters, who are the critters? Like, what imbalances do you have? What foods should we remove to decrease both this activity and your symptomology, right? And then it can also be restorative. So when you're looking at IBS and, I think you're throwing around dysbiosis, how can we use food as medicine to restore a microbial balance and really that immune reaction that's occurring, right? And that increased visceral sensitivity, use those levers to calm things down and improve, the day-to-day for those patients. Yeah, it's huge. I think even, nutritionists use our platform because now, hey, I know I want to put you on an autoimmune diet, standard autoimmune diet, whatever that might look like. But now let's take the next step. Maybe use Biome to leverage the microbiome for your health, and then maybe do also a food sensitivity test, pull those out. So it's a part of a larger, comprehensive program to treat any number of disorders. We focus on GI a lot, but again, because the GI tract has such a profound influence on our immune system and in our brain, and it's I want to say it's a one-stop shop, but it can have profound results. Absolutely. And that's the thing too, right? Because people don't understand, like with Biome, at least we're trying to treat the microbiome, which is kind of weird. Like we're giving you all these tools to improve the health of your microbes, right? But by doing that, we're actually improving your health. It's a little different thought process there, right?
I mean, to me, it's like terrain theory versus germ theory. If we go back to the 1800s, and it's like to me, the terrain is the microbiome. It's not that the terrain is the human DNA cells. So it's like terrain theory is like basically the health of the person relies on the health of the terrain. Germ theory says it doesn't matter what the terrain is, it's the power of the germ that's going to give you a virus or a bacterial infection. And there was during the past few years just a lot of, I would say, stone throwing at terrain theory when there should have been, in my opinion, a lot more curiosity around terrain theory of like what is, if we look at the terrain as the microbiomes of the body, and that there was a paper released, I don't know if you guys have read it, there's a paper released in 2021 on like, does the brain have a microbiome, right? With a lot of question marks around that of like, yeah. What do we know?
Yeah. We used to think the CSF and the brain environment, the cranium, was enclosed and sterile and like nothing was getting through the blood-brain barrier. But then we look at, autopsy results for Alzheimer's patients. We see, virus, bacteria, fungi. We see all kinds of critters in there. So it's, it's.
Well, I just want to highlight, Grant, too. I mean, in Ayurveda, there's a lot of things snorted in Ayurveda, right? And it's like, how do you hit the cerebrospinal fluid? Well, you go in through the nostrils to the olfactory bulb, to the cerebrospinal fluid, to the pineal gland, fast entries, right? And so to me, and a lot of my research right now, or a lot of what I'm reading in the scientific literature and trying to find more information on, is on urine therapy, which is, I don't know if you guys know anything about it, but from what I can tell, no, it's really fascinating. So indigenous cultures over time used urine to, from what I can tell, nourish the terrain, nourish the microbiome. Rub it on your skin, snort it up your nose, swish it in your mouth, drink it, enemas, douching, eyes, ear, like airs, any for anything and for everything. And from what I can tell, it has to do with the nitrogen cycle in the greenhouse or the garden. It's why urea is used as a fertilizer in the biotech growing industry. There's components in urine between the urea and the uric acid, and then everything else in terms of the hormones and stem cells and basically everything that's in the blood plasma ends up in the urine. That seems to be one of the fastest ways to nourish the terrain, whether it's to get the tongue to start producing nitric oxide or the parasinuses to start to create nitric oxide. So urine ferments. So urine's a fermented food too. And so why does it seem to nourish the microbiome? From what I can tell, it's just the body's already familiar with it because it's already inside the body, but urine ferments after about 4 days. It off-gasses ammonia, and then it starts to change, and it grows in its textures and potencies and smells. And so the yogis have used it forever. I mean, it's like, how far back does yoga go? Well, it turns out animals also use their own urine. So it's a mammalian thing more than just like a human thing. so back to the nose and the brain and the microbiome and trying to figure out like why in heavy urine therapy user groups where they're aging urine and snorting aged urine, which I know for so many people listening, you're like, okay, I'm going to tune out right now. This is too crazy. But I'm always interested in like, if yogis have been doing it for a long time, it's for a reason. Like, what could that possibly be? And what are they saying the reason is? And what they say the reason is that it decalcifies the pineal gland. So then I'm like, well, how would something go from up your nose to your pineal gland? And it's like, well, through the olfactory bulbs and the cerebrospinal fluid. So then that brought me to like, does the brain have a microbiome? So I'm curious, Grant, like, what are your thoughts on
Well,
brain?
yeah, absolutely. Well, we know the microbiome of the nasal cavity is, well, I shouldn't say we know, I think research is definitely leading that direction, right? Because it's being more and more recognized that, it goes back to basic anatomy, right? Your cranial nerve, number one, your olfactory nerve, it's got a kind of one-way ticket right through the cranium, through the cribriform plate, which kind of looks like a piece of Swiss cheese. This nerve and all its endings travel through that into the nasal cavity. And so now it's into the external world. So any microbes, virus, fungi that are in our nasal cavity that colonize that, they can travel up those nerve endings and then directly into the cranial space. So this idea that the brain and the cranium's enclosed, you can only get in and out through maybe the magnum foramen, where the spinal cord comes in and out, is false. So we're starting to understand this relationship and this activity and recognize patterns, right? How we leverage that is, still to be determined. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? What kind of balance are we trying to seek? But we definitely, I think the science recognizes the potential there in the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I read in terms of like the number of medicines, and you mentioned dementia. Like medicines for dementia and for endocrine imbalances of all sorts are being used basically as nasal inhalants.
Yeah,
right? So
glutathione, intranasal glutathione for Parkinson's. Yeah, there's a lot of potential and a lot of known therapies that hey, you want to get something into the brain, hey, you definitely want to snort it. It's a fast track, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah. So back to biome and precision supplementation. One of the questions I know people are going to have is like, is this something that ends up self-correcting as the microbiome becomes healthier? Or is this something that I'll basically need to take supplements for as long as I want to feel good?
That's a good one. Well, with our current status in agriculture, I know that the vitamin and mineral content is so much lower than it ever was. So I'd like to say that you wouldn't need to take supplements forever, but the reality is that we're just not getting the nutrients that we need from our food right now, especially in the US, the mono cropping. It's just not where it used to be and where we could be getting optimal health from. So I would say supplementation, at least for me, is part of my life, and I plan to do it, till the end of it. But
yeah, the question is, should you be doing the same thing day in, day out? Should there be any changes to your routine? I think that's where, we've already kind of spoken about diversity. You also want some diversity in your supplementation. What's great when you do a retest, we get another snapshot of your health, of both your genes and your microbial genes, and say, hey, how much progress have we made? How much change has there been? Do we need to change course? Maybe you had high sulfide gas and poor gut lining, but maybe now we put checks in those boxes, and now we're looking more towards your immune and mitochondrial health. And now what's great about our platform is now the artificial intelligence recommendation engine will adjust, will reformulate your recommendations and your dietary recommendations, and then deliver those right back to you in your app. And now you have kind of the next blueprint for your next 3 to 6 months of your nutrition plan. It's pretty cool.
And how frequently, so you said 3 to 6 months, like how frequently are people retesting, and does it have to do with how sick they are?
Yeah, so we recommend 3 to 6 months. Some people, the biohackers, the elite athletes, they may be doing monthly. And then you would want to test more frequently if you're having major changes to your microbiome. Like, for example, you're on antibiotics, or maybe you've done international travel, anything that would cause a change. You want to see what that change is and then respond to it.
Yeah.
And
So
it take
go ahead.
time. So that's why we recommend about 3 to 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with how, and one of the things I'm sort of obsessed with is like how different groups of people invest versus spend money, right? Because if it's covered, they're like, sure, I'll do it. And if it's not covered, it's like, I won't do it. And because I started Yoga Healer in 2001, and with Ayurveda and yoga, basically as the modalities in which I help people. And I could see early on, like in terms of how much people would invest in themselves, it had everything to do, in my experience, with what their beliefs were, more than how much money they had. It was really on what their beliefs were in terms of how good they could feel and how to invest in feeling good. Right. And so what I see with, like, you talk about peak performance athletes, they're not going to rely on something being covered. They're going to rely on like biohacking their way, investing in their cells, investing in their intelligence, investing in the kind of people they hang out with, in order to experience what it is to be on their edge as a human being and have full access to the technology of the human being. And what keeps so many people from buying a biome kit or buying precision supplements is often a belief. And it's not that they don't have the money, because usually they're wasting the money on something that's way less important. Whereas I've hung out I live in the mountains, like we're in a world-class mountaineering community. I have a lot of peak performance friends, right? Like they're not going to they're going to sacrifice in other places than in their own peak performance. So I would love to find out what you guys have to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You think of this idea of this, elite athlete going to the doctor, like looking for some guidance. But what's the doc going to do? It's like, hey, I'm going to do some standard labs and everything's going to come back normal, right? Well, it's not just about being normal. It's like, how do we optimize health? And I think that goes back to the function and how can we assess that function and optimize it? Even like your standard lab values, when you're looking at cholesterol levels or blood glucose, insulin, vitamin D, they're based off population statistics. You take a standard deviation, or I'm sorry, a mean, and look 2 standard deviations, and then there's your abnormal value. But what's the status? What's the health of the population that you're measuring? We're looking at our U.S. population. Is it healthy? No, I don't think so. I don't think it'd be a very hard argument to make that we as an entire population are healthy. The rates of obesity and diabetes, heart disease. So how can, with those tools, it's very difficult to really lead someone towards health and build that foundation. But if you can take a step back and say, hey, let's look at the function, like we can do now, and again restore those balances, then now we can really dial things in and talk about that peak performance.
Yeah. Anything to add, Hillary, on your own path, or with? I mean, you're a yogi, so you hang out with friends that do yoga, and it's like people use money in really different ways and have really different experiences in their bodies based on these decisions with how they use money. So I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, no, there's definitely all sorts of people, and it's hard to make a new habit, right? It's, you get stuck in your ways of, eating your ice cream or whatever it might be. It's hard to make that change. And so one of the things that Biome does is make it easy, right? It's at home. You don't have to see a doctor. You don't have to go anywhere. You just take your test at home, send it in the mail, and then you get everything right on your phone. And you can, check your food list when you're at the grocery store, or you can get your supplements delivered straight to your home. So that is one of the rules of habit change, is make it easy. And I think Biome is really helping with that, to help build a new healthy habit.
Yeah, I gotta say, I just absolutely love the test kit. I mean, even we took some COVID antibody test kits in our house last month, and it was like just the whole, I would say the whole industry around being able to empower individuals with more information about their bodies. Like my sense is like this is it's huge, and you don't have to schedule, you don't have to pay someone to have an office to do your thing. Like there's you and a lab. It's like there's you and the experts in the lab, and that's what I'm really enjoying about my experience with this, with Biome.
Yeah. Like you're saying, where are you putting your money? Someone that's suffering from, chronic back pain or joint pain, they're paying for all those medications, the NSAIDs, and maybe they're going and getting steroid injections. But are they looking at maybe the underlying causes? There's some imbalance in the muscle tissue, the joints, their gait, their environment. Are they sitting? There's so many possibilities. But going and doing that work and getting those tools to say, hey, actually, it's your psoas is pulling on your lumbar spine, which is putting stress on your SI. Let's just work on your psoas, and all those other, your hip and your back pain will likely go away. And now, by maintaining that, you're empowering that person. Say, hey, I'm going to identify that imbalance. I now have the stretches, the tools, my foam roller, whatever that that toolkit looks like to maintain that function. And now I no longer have to rely on those injections and those medications. That's education, that's empowerment, but people had to be willing to put in the time and the investment up front to say, hey, I want to get these resources and foster that health again. I feel like I'm on repeat mode with identifying loss of function and restoring balance, but that's really the name of the game.
Yeah. Really the choices that you make in your life, they all accumulate to form who your body or who you are at that time, right? And so it takes a lot of time to undo that. One pill with one target in your body, it's not always the best answer, right? It's undoing all of those changes, all of those choices you've made, and building a healthy lifestyle. And it takes time. And so putting in the time, the effort is really the key to finding healing, I think.
Yeah. Amen to that. All right, you guys, for those who want to get a Biome kit, we have a special deal, and you can go to yogahealer.com/VIOME and start your journey. Find out what's going on the inside. Well, thanks, you guys. Thanks for designing such a cool product and helping people with their precision supplements. It's really, I was just thrilled. I was also thrilled to see that Deepak Chopra was, behind it and endorsing it. And I was watching Deepak Chopra infomercials in the early 90s, learning about Ayurveda for the first time, and that he's been a big help to me in my career. So cool to see that some really great people are lining up with this technology.
It's absolutely, we're just getting started, so stay tuned.